Bernie Sanders made it official. He's with Hillary. But the question remains, are his millions of supporters with her as well? That's next on this edition of PoliticKING. Welcome to PoliticKING. I'm Laura Schwartz, sitting in for Larry King. Senator Bernie Sanders joined Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail and offered his endorsement for her presidential candidacy. But many of his millions of supporters are angry about that endorsement and feel betrayed. So the question remains, will Bernie's supporters show up for Mrs. Clinton in the fall? Or will they vote for the Libertarian ticket, Donald Trump, or just stay home? Let's talk about this with Kristen Soltis Anderson, columnist at the Washington Examiner and Republican pollster. She is also the author of the book, The Selfie Vote, Where Millennials Are Leading America and How the Republicans Can Keep Up. Well, Kristen, social media has played such a huge role in Bernie's primary campaign. But now that social media beast might just be used against Mrs. Clinton. What are you looking at as we go forward in this general election campaign?
The irony of this election is that for all of the advice that I'd give any political candidate who wants to win over younger voters, saying, you need to use social media, this is where the world's going, Donald Trump, bizarrely enough, has been one of the savviest users of social media in this election. And part of what he does so well, for better or worse, is he uses it as a means to authentically communicate what he believes. People actually believe that's Donald Trump there sitting at, on the tarmac on his plane, typing stuff in on a phone. And so for Bernie Sanders, one of his benefits of why he's been so appealing to so many voters, particularly those millennial voters, is that authenticity, is that sense that every time Bernie Sanders gets up on stage and says something, it's coming from his heart and he really means it. And that's what a lot of people are looking for in this election.
It's an interesting quote about authenticity, Kristen, because so many people think social media is anything but actually authentic. Now, many Bernie supporters feel a bit betrayed by his endorsement, quite honestly, and are renewing the use of the Never Hillary hashtag. Is that something we're going to see trend? Because help me understand, what are those other key digital and tech trends for the rest of the 2016 cycle?
Well, for this Never Hillary movement, folks within the Democratic Party who are really heartbroken that Bernie Sanders isn't the nominee, I think the big question is going to be, do they stay together as a movement? Do they think that sitting out the election really is the best way to make their voice heard? Or by the time we get to November, has Hillary Clinton somehow been able to say, look, you may not love me, but I'm a lot better than Donald Trump. If she's able to pull that off and actually convince all of these Sanders supporters that, look, I may not be the best person for the job in your view, but I'm certainly better than the alternative, that's going to be the crux of her message. And even if you listen to Bernie Sanders' endorsement of Hillary Clinton the other day, for every nice thing he said about Hillary Clinton, he teed it up with something really nasty about Donald Trump to draw that contrast. Because I think he is aware, and I think Hillary Clinton is aware, that for these folks that have put so much trust and admiration in Bernie Sanders, that Hillary Clinton's not the same person, doesn't really hold all the same beliefs. And so she's really going to have to work to bring those supporters into her fold. And frankly, Donald Trump may be the best gift she could have been given on that front.
Well, that's a very interesting look at it, Kristen, because it seems that Democrats have been ahead of the GOP in using data and digital. But why is that?
Well, this is one of those things where the pendulum swings back and forth. So in the 2004 election, it was Republicans who were the best at this stuff. The Bush re-election campaign had a great digital effort. By the time you got to 2008, you had Democrats that had really leapfrogged where Republicans were excellent at using data, Facebook. During the 2010 election, with the rise of the Tea Party, Republicans got good at using Twitter. But still, there is this huge gap where Democrats are still much better at using these tools. Donald Trump, bizarrely enough, is using social media to amplify his message pretty significantly. The problem is that his message is not one that is tailored for the demographic groups that tend to be on social media. So while he's using Twitter effectively, he's not using it to perhaps win over these 18 to 29-year-old voters who are going to be so key. So this is yet another election where Republicans, I worry, are still a bit behind where the Democrats are. And in fact, you hear about the Clinton campaign having hundreds of staffers devoted devoted to things like digital and data efforts, while the Trump campaign really has a skeleton crew and hasn't focused that much. I think if there is progress on the Republican side, it's going to come from candidates further down the ballot, folks running for Senate and governor's races and for Congress, that'll really have to be trying to build their own digital operations in the absence of one from the presidential level.
And it's interesting, Kristen, how you mentioned the demographics of social media, because it does come down to demographics. I know the Hillary Clinton campaign just recently brought on 3 people to deal with the millennial demographics that we're talking about. Now, in the primaries, Hillary was having an extremely difficult time with younger voters. Has that changed? Do you think it can change through a better, effective use of social media targeted towards them?
You know, whenever folks say, well, don't we need to use more social media to reach younger voters, I always like to point out that you have to have the right message in the medium. Just because you're using social media, if your message is really ineffective, you know, that, for instance, there was an attempt by the Clinton campaign a few months ago to say, tweet at us how you feel about student loan debt using 3 emojis. It was really silly. It was the sort of thing that just seems like somebody who's old trying to pander to millennials. So there are ways to try to use social media that sometimes fall flat. On the other hand, the other day, the Clinton campaign, responded to Donald Trump's tweet about how his use of the Star of David actually looked like something from a Frozen coloring book from, the Disney movie. And the Clinton campaign immediately tweeted back a joke, "Do you want to build a straw man?" Sort of making a really kind of funny play on a song from the movie. That's the right way to use social media. That's the kind of stuff that people will get a laugh at. They'll share it, they'll retweet it, and that'll put in front of them the Clinton campaign is sort of funny and thinks that Donald Trump is silly and is poking fun at him. That's an example of how to use it well. I don't think that Hillary Clinton is going to struggle with millennials in the general election as much as she did in the primary, because her opponent will be Donald Trump instead of Bernie Sanders, and it'll be a whole different pool of people who will be voting as well.
Kristen Soltis Anderson is my guest, and we'll have more with her after the break. Well, what about the third-party candidates, Kristen, particularly the Libertarian Gary Johnson? How likely is he to scoop up the Bernie Sanders supporters, whether using social media or, as you mentioned so eloquently, message?
There's a really big opportunity there for Gary Johnson, or for, I think, anybody who's a third-party candidate. We are increasingly seeing voters say that they don't want all of column A or all of column B. They don't want to just be a Republican or just be a Democrat. They think there's too much baggage included in all of those labels. So for a lot of folks, they're choosing not to affiliate with the party or choosing to be independent. And for a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, there's not a strong, perhaps, loyalty to the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders himself is, I think, an independent in the U.S. Senate who caucuses with the Democrats and is surely progressive and to the left politically. But, this idea that people are more and more often calling themselves independent, I think makes it slightly more likely that a third-party candidate can at least sort of make waves, if not become the president of the United States, at least complicate the math there a little bit. And if you think about it, Bernie Sanders is progressive on social issues. Gary Johnson and the Libertarians are progressive on social issues. On foreign policy, Bernie Sanders is perhaps more focused on restraint, not as hawkish. That's right where Libertarians are. They are not so sure we should be using military force. So it's really on just, I think, economic issues where you have a big difference between Libertarians and Bernie Sanders folks. But if they can bridge that divide or overcome that, that's 2 out of 3 major issue areas where there's some overlap.
And that's really within that overlap that people want to get to. And it's not just Hillary Clinton going after Bernie's supporters, and it's not just the Libertarians going after Bernie's supporters, but it's also Donald Trump going after Bernie's supporters. How effective do you think Donald Trump's bid for Bernie supporters that we've seen already, as will only ramp up during the general election, how effective will that be?
Well, there are a lot of voters out there who think that the system is rigged and that people who play by the rules and do the right thing can't get ahead in America anymore. Bernie Sanders supporters tend to feel that way. Now, overall, they think that it's corporations, big donors, big business who are rigging the system. But Donald Trump has not been shy about slamming the political system, slamming donors, slamming lobbyists, hitting some of those same populist notes. The problem will be that on, I think, a lot of those cultural issues, because so many Bernie Sanders supporters Sanders are a little more progressive. That's not exactly where Donald Trump is on certain things. But on trade and on, I think, economic issues, there is a surprising amount of overlap, and particularly some of these blue-collar folks that have found Bernie Sanders' message on things like trade or income inequality really appealing. Donald Trump thinks he's got an opportunity to peel folks off there.
How interesting, Kristen. You know, it seems most generational groups grow more conservative as they get older. Do you see that happening with millennials?
You know, I don't necessarily think it's going to be as likely to happen with millennials. With the baby boomer generation, a lot of them, when they first entered politics, it was right around the time of, you had Watergate happening, and so, started out pretty liberal, but then as they got older, did become conservative. But a lot of that was because the parties themselves were kind of realigning throughout the course of the boomers' lifetimes. For a lot of millennials, the things that we think of as making someone more conservative, becoming more religious, getting married, buying a home, living in a rural area, these aren't things that millennials are doing as often. And so as a result, all these things that might have made millennials grow more conservative as they got older, they're still living a lifestyle into their early to mid-30s that looks a lot more demographically like someone who votes on the left. So I don't think that it's a sure thing that Republicans can just sit back and wait and these millennials will all magically become Republicans one day. I think they need to start now conveying a message that talks to millennials where they're at with the lifestyle choices and the values that they're holding, instead of just waiting and hoping they become conservative down the road.
Well, and that ties right into the fact that, according to many press reports, Donald Trump's campaign has been plagued by disorganization and a lot of infighting. Do you sense his campaign realizes the importance of how you put it as message as it comes along with these millennial voters?
I don't think that the Trump campaign has really prioritized winning over millennial voters at this point. I think Donald Trump's electoral calculation is that he can win over older, white, working-class voters in Rust Belt states, places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and that's how he's going to put together enough electoral votes to become president. That may mean not focusing as much on younger voters, Latino voters, which, by the way, those are two demographic groups where there's a lot of overlap. Donald Trump's done a lot to alienate those kinds of voters and hasn't really built up any kind of message or infrastructure to reach out to them. So his strategy at this point seems to be run up the numbers with white voters, run up the numbers with older voters, and hope that it can offset the voters from other demographic groups, or at the very least, hope that they stay home because they're not as interested in coming out for Hillary Clinton. I think that's dangerous math on his part, and I think it's going to ultimately wind up backfiring in the end.
And you're right, it's mathematical, Kristen, it sure is. Do you have a prediction for November, Clinton or Trump?
Oh, gosh. Well, this is such an unpredictable year in so many ways. I mean, who'd have thought we'd be headed into the Republican convention with Donald Trump as the nominee, and there's not even potentially going to be a floor fight, that he's won it outright. But I think right now the polls certainly suggest that Hillary Clinton has an advantage. If you look at the Electoral College, there are enough states that Democrats have a pretty strong track record of winning over the last 6 presidential elections, that Republicans not only need to hold all of the red states that are already their turf, but flip a bunch of blue states. And that's going to be pretty hard when you see polls coming out of places like North Carolina that show Trump not necessarily holding the kinds of leads that he should, or losing states like Florida by margins significantly larger than what Mitt Romney lost them by. So it's going to be hard because Republicans are going to be playing defense in places they're not used to playing defense, offense in places they're not used to playing offense. It's kind of hard to see how he pieces together the electoral votes to win.
Well, I tell you, Kristen Soltis Anderson, you've shared some great information with us today. Thank you so much for your time. And hey, there's more politicking after the break. Welcome back to PoliticKING. I'm Laura Schwartz, in for Larry King. Joining me now to continue the conversation is Richard Fowler, host of The Richard Fowler Show and a specialist in progressive messaging and millennial engagement. Richard joins me from our nation's capital. Thanks so much for being on, Richard.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Well, Richard, as a messaging expert, and we've just seen Bernie Sanders endorse Mrs. Clinton not long ago, how does Secretary Clinton combat the vitriol we've seen on social media by Bernie Sanders supporters who are angry about his endorsement of her?
Well, here's the thing. I think it's going to take time for the party to come together. If you remember, just about 8 years ago, there was a never Obama people who would nowhere ever vote for the president, wouldn't get involved in the president's campaign. And what you saw is over time after the convention leading up to November, not only did they vote for him, but they voted for him in record number, and then they turned back out again to vote for him in 2012. So it's just going to take time for old wounds to mend. And here's what Bernie Sanders has been so capable of doing over the past year of his campaign. Bernie Sanders has been able to slowly but surely move Hillary Clinton and move the Democratic Party, and I wouldn't even say to the left, but move them closer towards the needs of working families, right? Making sure that we have a $15 minimum wage, making sure we stop very, very unfair trade deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, so on and so forth. And those type of things and that type of movement is going to make Hillary Clinton a better candidate, make the Democratic Party better, and also it's going to make those Bernie supporters turn to her as the best alternative against Donald Trump.
I think you just laid out the messaging Hillary Clinton needs to use for the rest of her campaign, Richard, moving towards the will of the voters, not necessarily left or center. But that Never Hillary hashtag is still feeding social media. You think that's really going to drop after the conventions and it gets underway?
No, not at all. A recent Gallup poll showed that this is before Bernie Sanders even dropped out of the race, 78% of Bernie supporters said they will be voting for Hillary Clinton in this upcoming election. Now, you can't look at the Democrats and Hillary Clinton in a vacuum. You have to look at what's happening on the other side. On the other side, you have Donald Trump, who has not received endorsements from John Kasich, who won Ohio, who is the sitting governor of Ohio, on the person that won the Ohio primary. And we all know historically that for a Republican president to win the presidency, that road has to go through Ohio. And the other person that you haven't seen Donald Trump receive an endorsement from is Ted Cruz, who was sort of the holder, or I would say the placeholder and the card holders for what you would call the conservative Christian right portion of the Republican Party, right? And he has not endorsed Donald Trump. We're not sure if he will endorse Donald Trump at the convention. And so there's still some problems with the Republicans coming together that gives Hillary Clinton an added advantage as we take some time as a Democratic Party to come together.
Well, in that time of coming together through it all, Hillary Clinton is no stranger to personal and political attacks. But Donald Trump has vowed a no-holds-barred fight should the Clinton campaign take personal swings against him. So should they take those swings, Richard?
I don't think the Clinton campaign has to take too many swings at Donald Trump because I think he swings at himself. You could use his own words against him over and over again. A couple weeks ago, we saw Vedano make a comment about a judge, a federal judge, who indicated that the reason why this judge can't judge him fairly is because that judge is from Mexico and Donald Trump is trying to build a wall. And the truth is that judge is from Indiana. And his decision has no bearing on whether or not Donald Trump decides to build a wall. So the Trump campaign and Donald Trump being so fast to tweet and sort of really not understanding how to run a continental campaign is going to make their own missteps. And I think they're going to make glaring mistakes. And so even if the Hillary Clinton campaign will point some of them out, the Trump campaign will point them out all by themselves.
So do you think those pulling out the personal attacks will be glaring mistakes? I mean, Donald Trump's already described Secretary Clinton as a liar, as a failed Secretary of State. He's brought up Bill Clinton's past. You believe that's going to backfire on him?
Yeah, I think that's going to backfire on him, and I don't think the American people are definitely angry. There's no question about that, right? And there's two roads. They could either turn that anger into aspiration and action, or they could turn that anger into fear, and that fear into voting for Donald Trump, right? But here's what we know to be the truth. In homes all across this country, Americans are dealing with real issues. How to pay the bills, how to make ends meet, how to keep the lights on. Will their kids' school be open next year? Real issues that people are dealing with. Donald Trump hasn't really rolled out any real solutions to some of these problems. And I think we'd be mistaken if we didn't talk about what happened in Dallas and what happened in East Baton Rouge and what happened in Minnesota. America's at a tipping point. There's no question about it. And Donald Trump, as a candidate, for him to even garner the White House, he's going to have to find a way to bridge that tipping point. This election will come down to which candidate can bridge that tipping point the quickest with the most sincere, contrite, and honest policy solutions.
Well, do you think the third-party candidate is speaking to that same aspiration? Because the millennials are going to be up for grabs between Donald Trump, Secretary Clinton, and, of course, the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson. How likely is he to scoop up some of these Bernie Sanders supporters?
Well, I think Gary Johnson will do enough of his own of scooping up a lot of the Republicans for supporters, right? A lot of the Libertarians who were with Rand Paul, some that could have been with Ted Cruz. And there's no question. This could be a three-person debate. All the Gary Johnson campaign has to do is get to 15% for us to see a debate, a national televised debate with three individuals on the stage and not just two. And if they could do that, I mean, I think what we know from history and what we know from polls that they will take away not from the Democrats, but from the Republicans. I don't see any Bernie Sanders supporters going over to vote for Gary Johnson. I think before they do that, they'd probably end up sitting at home. And I don't think Bernie supporters are going to sit at home because they're so deathly afraid of what a Trump candidacy will look like.
Well, Richard, we certainly know you're not going to be sitting at home. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today, Richard Fowler. During the primary election, Bernie Sanders' campaign was buoyed largely in part by younger voters, specifically those who loved his stance on helping students burdened by college loans. Senator Sanders' endorsement of Hillary Clinton does not automatically mean that those voters will show up for her in the fall. And the question remains, what Secretary Clinton's policy towards college debt and student loans will be. Well, someone who has made a lot of news recently on this issue is rapper and hip-hop artist D1. D1 is a New Orleans native, a middle school math teacher turned rapper, and someone who isn't afraid to address politics in his music. His song, Sally Mae Back, has been hailed by the Washington Post as the anthem for a generation. D1 joins me today from San Francisco. Welcome, D1.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, D1, you've seen a lot of great, well-earned success this year with your student loan victory song, Sally Mae Back. And ESPN wants you to create the song for the undefeated. So really, congratulations on such a year. You know, the Washington Post earlier this year said Sally Mae Back might be the anthem for a generation. So what's that? That's your take on the student debt in America. But what does that whole nationalizing of that song as an anthem mean to you? Did you even have that in mind when you wrote it?
I certainly had it in mind because I know that millions of Americans are taking out loans to go to college every day, but unfortunately, they don't have music coming from hip-hop artists that reflects their lifestyle. So they resort to music about selling drugs and murdering other people, which we know we don't need any more of that during these times. But they don't have anyone who's making music about their everyday experience. So I made music about things that I knew was real to a lot of people. And taking out student loans is something that a lot of us can relate to.
And it's something a lot of us have been hearing about daily in the general election campaign for president, the primary campaign for president here in our country of America. So let me ask you, have you declared or do you support one candidate over the other?
Well, to be honest with you, I'll be voting for Hillary Clinton. So that's something that I hadn't publicly said or proclaimed, but Donald Trump is just too divisive for me. You know, I'm a man of love. I feel like before the black race or the white race is the human race, and I just think that I don't feel love coming from Donald Trump's spirit. So you know, although I might not be well versed on every single stance that they have on the issues, I just feel like this is a time where we need love more than ever. You know, because I'm a man of faith, I'm a man of God, and I know a good spirit when I see one, and I know what to stay away from. And I don't fully agree with either candidate on every issue across the board, but I do know that Donald Trump, it just seems he just has such a divisive nature about him that I wouldn't want him to lead my country.
You know, you, like I mentioned, you grew up in New Orleans, you taught math, you connected through your students a lot through hip hop and rap, is that correct?
Very correct, yes. I was a math teacher, and I chose purposely to get into the hip-hop industry because although I was teaching the students math, they needed more life skills than anything because they come from broken families. They come from an area where poverty, honestly, hinders the learning process to where their minds aren't even in the right place. And they look up to entertainers and athletes as their role models. And I see so many entertainers who don't want to be role models. So I said, I'm a young black man from the hood. I teach in the hood. I want to get into the hip-hop industry, make a name for myself, and show all of these young men and women that you can be real, be righteous, and be relevant in life.
Well, D1, that is a message we need now more than ever in America and around the world in light of the tragic shootings of these young men, in light of the tragic shootings of Dallas, but going specifically to Baton Rouge and the shooting of Alton Sterling. You used to sell mixed tapes as you were coming up in the industry. On the site of Alton Sterling's shooting, the S market, how did that news affect you?
Honestly, Laura, I have goosebumps, as you said, as I'm sitting here, just because that situation is so real to me. I attended a rally when I was back in Baton Rouge a few days back, and I just see the spirit of the whole city is shattered right now, and people are so divided. Like I said, we act like it's something we can just sweep under the rug. I see it from all perspectives, honestly. I used to sell mixtapes right there on that corner, and I know that if you don't, I don't look at you as a white woman, and hopefully you wouldn't look at me as a black man based on just race. Hopefully we look at one another as members of the human race before anything. And if you respect someone and you love someone because they're a human being, there's certain actions, whether you're a police officer or not, that you just won't partake in. You won't be overly aggressive and use excessive force when it's not necessary if you respect someone equally as a human being. And I know that that's what we're lacking right now.
D1, thank you for joining me on this edition of Politicking. And thank you to Larry King for letting me sit in this chair today. Remember, we love hearing from you. Please join the conversation on Larry's Facebook page. And as always, you can share your thoughts on Twitter by tweeting @KingsThings and using the hashtag politicking. I also invite you to join me on Twitter @Laura Schwartz. From there, you'll find links to my work and website. That's all for this edition of Politicking. Thanks so much for being with us.